I moved your inheritance into my name, starting fresh with someone younger who actually appreciates me. Greg's voice crackled through the phone from whatever beachside paradise he was calling from, followed by that smug laugh I'd grown to despise. You really should have paid more attention to your accounts, sweetheart. The words hit me like ice water, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I sat quietly in my kitchen in Portland, Oregon, watching the rain streak down the window as my 22-year marriage crumbled in real time. I could hear laughter in the background, female laughter, and the sound of waves. Some golf trip. You're right, I whispered into the phone, my voice steady as stone. You deserve it. Then I hung up. My name is Danielle Foster, and I'm 45 years old. I work as a senior accountant for Hollowgate Systems, a mid-sized logistics company, and I've spent most of my adult life being methodical, careful, and maybe too trusting. But not today. Today, I felt something shift inside me, like tumblers falling into place in a lock. Greg thought he was clever. He thought that after 2 decades of marriage, he could simply waltz away with the inheritance I'd received from my Uncle Theodore 18 months ago. What he didn't know was that I'd learned to be very, very careful with money, especially after watching him blow through his own savings on his midlife crisis toys. The motorcycle, the expensive golf clubs, the designer clothes he claimed were networking investments. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat back down at my kitchen table, where my laptop was still open to the banking portal I'd been checking when he called. The inheritance, $600,000 plus the family cabin in the mountains, had been my security blanket, my escape plan that I'd hoped I'd never need to use. But Greg's timing was spectacularly poor. What he didn't realize was that Uncle Theodore had been more than just wealthy. He'd been paranoid about money, having lost his first fortune to a scheming business partner decades ago. When he'd left everything to me, he'd also left detailed instructions about protecting inherited wealth from predators and opportunists. I'd followed those instructions to the letter. The phone rang again. I glanced at the caller ID and saw Greg's number, but I didn't answer. Let him stew. Let him wonder why I'd been so calm, so accepting of his betrayal. He was about to learn that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. Outside, the rain kept falling, and I allowed myself a small smile. Greg had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he didn't even know it yet. Growing up, I'd always been the responsible one. While my friends were out partying, I was studying accounting, planning for a stable future. I met Greg during my senior year of college. He was charming, ambitious, and talked about building an empire together. Back then, I believed him. For 22 years, I'd managed our household finances while Greg chased one get-rich-quick scheme after another. His construction company that folded after 6 months, the restaurant investment that turned into a tax nightmare, the cryptocurrency venture that cost us our vacation fund. Each time, I'd quietly cleaned up the mess, rebuilt our savings, and never said a word about his failures. Greg saw my silence as weakness. I saw it as strategy. When Uncle Theodore passed away last year, I'd grieved not just for the loss of the only family member who truly understood me, but for the end of our Sunday afternoon conversations about money, legacy, and the importance of protecting what you've earned. Theodore had built his wealth twice, once in his 30s, only to lose it all to a business partner's betrayal, and again in his 50s with the hard-won wisdom of experience. Danielle, he'd told me during one of our last visits, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. Trust is earned daily, but lost in an instant. Protect yourself, even from the people you love most. I'd nodded politely then, thinking he was being overly cautious. Now I understood he'd been giving me a roadmap. After receiving the inheritance, I'd spent weeks meeting with Theodore's financial advisor, a sharp woman named Patricia Wells, who specialized in inheritance protection. Together, we'd structured everything through Gravora Group Private Banking, a firm that catered to clients who valued discretion and security above all else. The accounts weren't just protected by passwords. They were wrapped in layers of fraud detection, legal safeguards, and authorization protocols that required multiple forms of verification for any significant transactions. Greg's name appeared nowhere on any of the documents. In fact, the only way he could have access to anything was if I'd voluntarily added him as a beneficiary and provided him with the specific authorization codes, which of course I hadn't. What Greg had tried to do was probably access our joint checking account, where I'd deposited a small portion of the inheritance for household expenses. But the bulk of Uncle Theodore's gift remained safely locked away, earning interest and waiting for the day I might actually need it. That day, apparently, had arrived sooner than I'd expected. I opened my laptop and began making a list of everything I needed to do. Greg had just handed me the perfect reason to finally take control of my life. The call I'd been expecting came at 7:15 the next morning. Greg's voice was tight with confusion and barely contained panic. "Danielle, what the hell is going on? I tried to transfer the money yesterday, and now the bank is saying there's some kind of investigation. They froze everything." I was already dressed and having coffee, having slept better than I had in months. "Good morning to you too, Greg. How's your golf trip going?" "Cut the crap. What did you do?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring both the rich Colombian blend and the sound of fear creeping into my husband's voice. "I didn't do anything, sweetheart. But apparently you tried to commit bank fraud. That tends to trigger automatic security protocols." The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Greg spoke again, his voice strained. "What are you talking about? I'm your husband. I have rights to that money." "Actually, you don't." I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the morning drizzle. Uncle Theodore's inheritance was placed in a protected trust specifically designed to prevent unauthorized access. When you tried to move funds without proper authorization, you triggered fraud prevention measures. You're lying. Married couples share assets automatically. Not inherited assets placed in protective trusts, Greg. Especially not when the beneficiary has been advised to protect those assets from potential threats. I paused, letting that sink in. The bank considers your attempted transfer to be identity theft and attempted grand larceny. I could hear him breathing hard through the phone. In the background, I caught the sound of that same female laughter from yesterday. My replacement was apparently still enjoying her vacation, blissfully unaware that her sugar daddy had just become a liability. "Danielle, you need to fix this. Call the bank and tell them you authorize the transfer." "Why would I do that?" "Because we're married. Because you love me. Because you called me yesterday to announce you were leaving me for someone younger," I finished quietly. "Because you've been lying to me about this golf trip? Because you thought you could steal my inheritance and run off into the sunset?" Another long silence. When Greg spoke again, his voice had lost all its bluster. "I can explain everything." "I'm sure you can, but I'm not interested in hearing it." I set down my coffee cup and reached for the manila folder I'd prepared the night before. "I'm filing for divorce today, Greg. My lawyer will be in touch." "You can't do this. That money belongs to both of us." "No," I said calmly. "It really doesn't. And thanks to your little stunt yesterday, you've just made my divorce attorney's job incredibly easy." I hung up and turned off my phone. Today was going to be a very busy day, and I had a lot of people to call. But first, I was going to enjoy another cup of coffee and watch the rain. For the first time in years, the weather matched my mood perfectly, clear and refreshing. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in the offices of Patterson & Associates, the law firm I'd quietly consulted 3 months ago, when Greg's behavior had started becoming increasingly erratic. My attorney, Jennifer Patterson, was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in complex divorce cases involving hidden assets and financial fraud. "Danielle, I have to say, this is one of the cleaner cases I've seen in years," Jennifer said, reviewing the documents I'd brought. Your husband essentially gift-wrapped his infidelity and attempted theft for us. I'd come prepared with everything. Screenshots of Greg's suspicious credit card charges over the past 6 months, including hotels in cities where he'd supposedly been on business trips, expensive dinners for two, and jewelry purchases I'd never received. I also had the banking records showing his attempted unauthorized access to my inheritance, complete with timestamps and fraud alerts. What I don't understand, Jennifer continued, is how he thought he could access a protected trust without your authorization codes. I pulled out my phone and showed her a series of text messages from 6 months ago. He's been asking me about my banking passwords, claiming he wanted to help organize our finances. I always gave him vague answers, but I think he's been watching me enter information when I thought he wasn't paying attention. The truth was more calculated than that. I'd suspected Greg was planning something for months. The late-night phone calls he claimed were work-related, the sudden interest in our financial accounts, the way he'd started asking seemingly innocent questions about Uncle Theodore's inheritance, and where exactly the money was being held. I'd started setting traps. 3 weeks ago, I'd left a fake bank statement on my desk, one showing a much smaller inheritance balance in a different account. Greg had photographed it when he thought I wasn't looking. I'd watched him through the reflection in my computer monitor, his fingers flying as he captured the account numbers and routing information. Yesterday's attempted theft had been his move against the wrong account entirely. There's something else, I told Jennifer, pulling out a manila envelope. Greg's been transferring money out of our joint accounts for months. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger automatic alerts, but it adds up to almost $15,000. Jennifer's eyebrows shot up as she reviewed the documentation. Where was the money going? An account I'd never seen before. I hired a private investigator last month to look into it. I slid another document across her desk. Turns out Greg opened a secret account 8 months ago. The money was being used to fund his affair. Hotel rooms, trips, gifts for his girlfriend. And you have proof of the affair? I nodded toward my phone. The investigator followed him to Phoenix last weekend. Photos, video, credit card receipts. His golf trip is actually a romantic getaway with a 28-year-old named Amber, who works at his favorite sports bar. Jennifer was taking notes quickly. This is excellent work, Danielle. With this level of documentation, we can file for divorce on grounds of adultery and financial malfeasance. Plus, his attempted theft yesterday gives us leverage for a very favorable settlement. There's one more thing, I said quietly. When I set up the inheritance protection with my uncle's financial advisor, I included a clause that would automatically revoke any claim Greg might have to shared marital assets if he ever attempted to access the inheritance fraudulently. Jennifer looked up from her notes. You mean his attempt yesterday triggered an automatic forfeiture clause? As of yesterday evening, Greg legally forfeited his claim to our house, our shared savings, and his portion of my retirement accounts. I smiled grimly. Uncle Theodore was very thorough in his advice about protecting family wealth from predators. Jennifer sat back in her chair, looking impressed. Your uncle sounds like he was a very wise man. He was, and he taught me that sometimes the best defense is preparation. The call from Patricia Wells at Gravora Group Private Banking came at 11 a.m., just as I was leaving Jennifer's office. Patricia's voice was professionally calm, but I could hear satisfaction underneath. Mr. Foster has been calling our offices repeatedly since 8 this morning, she said. He seems to be under the impression that he can resolve this situation by speaking to a supervisor. And what have you told him? That any investigation into attempted unauthorized access to protected accounts must be handled through proper legal channels. We've also informed him that his actions have triggered automatic security protocols that cannot be reversed without court intervention. I smiled as I walked to my car. What exactly does that mean for him? Well, the attempted transfer has been reported to federal banking authorities as suspicious activity. Additionally, his social security number has been flagged in our system as a potential threat to account security. Any future attempts to access accounts linked to the trust will result in immediate law enforcement notification. This was even better than I'd hoped. Uncle Theodore's paranoid security measures were turning out to be a gift that kept giving. "There's something else," Patricia continued. "When we were reviewing the incident, we discovered that Mr. Foster had been making inquiries about your accounts for several months. He called our offices in February, claiming to be your financial advisor and requesting account information." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "He did what?" "Our staff followed protocol and refused to provide any information. But we have records of multiple calls and one in-person visit where he attempted to present himself as your representative. At the time, we simply logged it as suspicious activity, but given yesterday's events, it establishes a clear pattern of premeditation." I pulled into a parking space and sat in my car, processing this information. Greg hadn't just been planning to steal from me. He'd been actively scheming for months, trying to find ways to access money that wasn't his. "Patricia, I need you to document everything. My attorney will want copies of all communication logs, security reports, and any evidence of his attempts to access the accounts." "Already prepared," she said efficiently. "I'll have everything couriered to your lawyer's office within the hour." After hanging up, I sat in my car for several minutes, watching office workers hurry through the drizzle. 22 years of marriage, and I was discovering that my husband was essentially a stranger. The Greg I'd fallen in love with in college would never have attempted something so calculating and cruel. Or maybe he would have, and I'd just been too trusting to see it. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Amber. Greg told me what you did to him. You're a vindictive bitch who doesn't deserve a man like him. He's never been happier than he is with me." I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Tell Greg that when he gets arrested for bank fraud, he'll have plenty of time to think about how happy you make him." The response came immediately. "What arrest?" I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the text to Jennifer with a note. Evidence of ongoing affair and contact information for the other woman. Then I drove to my office at Hollowgate Systems. I had work to do, and maintaining my normal routine would be important in the days ahead. My colleagues didn't need to know that my personal life was imploding, at least not yet. But as I walked into the building, I felt lighter than I had in months. Greg had been planning his escape for months, thinking he was orchestrating the perfect betrayal. What he didn't realize was that he'd walked straight into a trap that Uncle Theodore had designed specifically for men exactly like him. The knock on my office door at Hollowgate Systems came just before lunch. My supervisor, David Walsh, poked his head in with a concerned expression. "Danielle, there are 2 people here to see you. They say they're from federal banking enforcement." My heart skipped, but I kept my voice steady. "Send them in, please." 2 agents entered my office. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a younger man who looked like he'd stepped out of a recruiting poster. They showed their credentials and introduced themselves as Agent Martinez and Agent Thompson. "Mrs. Foster, we're investigating suspicious banking activity related to your inheritance accounts," Agent Martinez said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "We understand your husband attempted to access protected funds without authorization." "That's correct." I closed my laptop and gave them my full attention. "He called me yesterday from what he claimed was a golf trip to inform me he'd moved my inheritance into his name. When I told him I didn't believe that was possible, he became agitated." Agent Thompson was taking notes. "Were you aware of any prior attempts by your husband to access these accounts?" "Not until this morning when my banking representative informed me there had been previous inquiries. Apparently he'd been calling the bank for months, claiming to be my financial advisor." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I should mention that I'm filing for divorce. My attorney has documentation of financial irregularities in our joint accounts as well." The agents exchanged glances. Agent Martinez leaned forward. "Mrs. Foster, we need you to understand that what your husband attempted wasn't just a civil matter between spouses. Attempting to access federally protected inheritance trusts through fraudulent means is a serious crime." "How serious?" "Bank fraud charges could result in up to 20 years in federal prison and substantial fines," Agent Thompson said quietly, "especially when there's evidence of premeditation and ongoing deception." I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Greg thought he was stealing my money and running off with his girlfriend. Instead, he'd potentially destroyed his entire future. "What happens next?" I asked. "We'll need you to come in and give a formal statement. We'll also need access to any communications you have with your husband regarding the inheritance and any documentation of suspicious financial activity." Agent Martinez handed me a business card. "Your banking institution has been very cooperative in providing evidence of the attempted access." After the agents left, I sat alone in my office, staring out the window at the Portland skyline. Part of me felt guilty for not warning Greg about how thoroughly protected the inheritance was. But then I remembered his phone call yesterday. The smugness in his voice, the casual cruelty of announcing his betrayal, the laughter of another woman in the background. Greg had made his choice. He'd chosen to see my patience as weakness, my trust as stupidity, and my love as something he could exploit and discard. My phone rang. Greg's number again. This time, I answered. "Danielle, please, you have to help me. There are federal agents asking questions. This has gone too far." "Has it?" I asked quietly. "I made a mistake, okay? I got scared about our future, about money, and I panicked. But we can fix this. We can work it out." "Greg, you didn't make a mistake. You planned this for months. You opened secret accounts. You lied about business trips. You've been stealing from our joint savings to fund your affair, and you attempted to commit federal bank fraud." My voice was calm, almost conversational. "The only thing you didn't plan for was getting caught. What do you want from me? What will it take to make this go away?" "Nothing," I said. "There's nothing you can do to make this go away. You did this to yourself." Then I hung up and went to lunch. The news that Greg had been arrested came 3 days later through a call from Agent Martinez. I was at home, preparing dinner for one, and actually enjoying the quiet, when my phone rang. "Mrs. Foster, I wanted to inform you that we've taken your husband into custody on charges of attempted bank fraud, identity theft, and violation of federal banking regulations." I set down my wooden spoon and leaned against the kitchen counter. "Where was he arrested?" "Phoenix. He was attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica with his companion when airport security detained him." Agent Martinez's voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Apparently, fleeing the country while under federal investigation isn't advisable." After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine and called Jennifer Patterson with the update. She was delighted with the news, explaining that Greg's arrest would expedite our divorce proceedings significantly. "A spouse in federal custody for financial crimes pretty much eliminates any claim he might have had to marital assets," she said. "Plus, his attempted flight from the country suggests consciousness of guilt." That evening, I received a series of increasingly frantic voicemails from Amber, Greg's girlfriend. The first was angry, accusing me of destroying a good man out of spite. By the third message, her tone had shifted to pleading, asking if there was anything I could do to help Greg. I deleted them all without responding. The next morning, my doorbell rang. A courier delivered a thick envelope containing documents from Gravora Group Private Banking. Patricia Wells had included a handwritten note. "All security protocols have been reset. Your inheritance remains fully protected and has continued earning interest throughout this ordeal. Your uncle would be proud." I smiled, thinking about Uncle Theodore's warnings about predators and opportunists. He'd been absolutely right, and his preparations had saved me from losing everything to a man who'd never deserved my trust in the first place. 6 weeks later, I stood in the courthouse as Judge Morrison finalized my divorce decree. Greg appeared via video link from federal detention, looking haggard and defeated. His public defender had advised him to agree to all terms, rather than fight a battle he couldn't win. The settlement was everything Jennifer had promised. I kept the house, my retirement accounts, the inheritance, and my car. Greg kept his legal troubles and a debt to the federal government that would follow him for decades. The defendant forfeited any claim to marital assets through his attempted fraudulent access to protected accounts, Judge Morrison stated for the record. This divorce is granted with prejudice, and all financial arrangements are final and non-negotiable. As I walked out of the courthouse, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Catherine. Saw the news about Greg's sentencing. 28 months in federal prison. Are you okay? I texted back, never been better. That afternoon, I met with Patricia Wells to discuss investment strategies for my newfound financial freedom. The inheritance, combined with my half of our previous shared assets, gave me enough security to consider early retirement, or perhaps starting my own accounting practice. Your uncle included a letter to be given to you after any legal proceedings involving the inheritance were resolved, Patricia said, handing me a sealed envelope. Inside, Uncle Theodore's familiar handwriting offered his final advice. Danielle, if you're reading this, it means someone tried to take what wasn't theirs. I hope my preparation served you well. Remember that the greatest wealth is peace of mind, and you've earned yours. Build something beautiful with what remains. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my purse. Uncle Theodore had given me more than money. He'd given me the tools to recognize my own worth and the strength to protect it. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities that were entirely mine to choose. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here, from trusting wife to empowered woman in just a few short months. Greg's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating, forcing me to discover a strength I never knew I possessed.